Okay, we've got 20 minutes or longer, if you wish, for a discussion. I think one point I just want to remind you is, just in case you have an impression, I hope you haven't, but in case you do, that we are aliens from a different planet who've been dropped into Cumbria to do unto you. That's not the case at all. We're here to help you. The plans, the thinking has to be yours, and it has to be owned by you. We will give maximum help and support and advice wherever we're able to. Now, there are a number of people in this room who are community leaders, patient representatives and so forth, as well as from hospital and community foundation trust boards, etc. But I'd quite like to just give community leaders and patient representatives, if you like, the first opportunity to raise any questions, and then we'll, if time permits, throw it open a little more widely. Now, if you would like to stand up and tell us who you are. Also, if anyone doesn't want to be filmed, remember to say so.
I represent people and patients. My name is Mahesh Devar. By occupation, I worked with NHS for 30 years. I'm a retired consultant orthopedic surgeon. And out of the 30, 24 was in West Cumberland Hospital. There are 2 points I would like to make. The one is the name. The people of West Cumbria really feels left out by the name North Cumbria. We need to change the name from North Cumbria to North West Cumbria, like you have North West Devon, for example. The second thing I would like to say is you need to look at the reasons why there are recruitment crises. Up until 2012, there was no recruitment crisis. I know it because I was there. I think the reason for recruitment crises are uncertainty of the services, low morale, climate of fear, and also no critical mass of the emergency activity. If I'm a new young doctor who practice my trade, I will not come now to West Cumberland Hospital to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure what latitude we've got to change the name, but we'll certainly give that some careful thought. In terms of the solutions, if you had the opportunity to design something that was different, what would it look like for West Cumberland?
We always had a system where the patient did transfer for the complex and high-risk surgery. At the same time, a simple trauma, simple emergencies used to be done at West Cumberland Hospital. I can't see why a broken wrist or broken ankle or dislocated shoulder need to be transferred to Carlisle.
Okay.
It can very well be done as a day case in West Cumberland Hospital. You have that critical mass of activity which will support A&E staff. There must be something wrong with the system when A&E consultants in mass threaten to resign, which they have done.
Thank you very much indeed. Other questions, challenges, comments? Sorry, there's a light behind you and I can't quite make it out. Could you introduce yourself?
Is it switched on? Sorry, I'm Sue Heyman. I'm the Member of Parliament for Workington. What I'd like to say is we talked about how we have to get it right this time. And you talked in your opening remarks about how we would need to be ambitious and radical, and there would be tough decisions to be made. Well, if we're going to get it right, and if people are going to come along with us when we're having to make those tough decisions, we have to get the communications and engagement right, because it's not been done well in the past. You talked about significant engagement, and Health Watch laid out some ideas about what they were going to do. What I'd like to ask is, one, when will the communications and engagement strategy be available for us all to look at? Two, when are you likely to start the engagement? Three, what expert advice are you taking when drafting up your strategy of what you're going to do? And finally, do you actually have the capacity to run the significant engagement that you referred to?
Right, now, let me see if I can remember all of the points that you raised. Actually, the engagement process starts today. And Sue put up a slide that described some of the steps we are going to take, and Sue also made the point that that in itself is not sufficient. I'd like to hear advice from you, Sue, and fellow MPs, because you know far more about this than many people, about what you believe we ought to do additionally. We have access to professional advice, and we will employ more to support our engagement efforts. And in terms of the development of our thinking, our strategy, our service strategy, your service strategy, we're going to employ external advisors to give us a steer about whether they think we're on the right track or not. But the really important thing is what clinicians and communities and people within communities think about our direction of travel as well.
The strategy element is actually for the communications and engagement. I mean, what you're trying to achieve from that, where you're going, what you're doing, what its purpose is, what you're asking people about, how you're actually going to deliver that effectively. I mean, you shouldn't really be starting your engagement until you've got your strategy sorted. Otherwise, how do you know what you're asking people? How do people know what they can influence?
Well, Sue, if I may say so, that would be dealing with a point that Sue said, which actually means we've nothing to talk to you about, therefore we can't engage. Well, we can't have that. We have to start the engagement process now and garner ideas from people, even if we're not clear ourselves yet about what the strategy ultimately for our services will look like. There has to be dialogue. It has to be a two-way process. If we followed your line, if I understand it correctly, we might not be starting comprehensive engagement for some while whilst we organise our thoughts. That's not acceptable.
No, to actually get a communication strategy together isn't a long-term thing. I mean, you just need to work out what you're saying to people, how you're saying to people, what you expect from them, and make it clear to them what they can actually influence. Because what concerns me is if you start talking to people without telling them what decisions have already been taken and what they can actually influence, then you're not going to bring people on board. That's what I'm trying to get across.
I mean, we have started that work. There's more to be done. And would you be prepared to join us and help us design that communication strategy?
Very much so.
Thank you. Well, we'll certainly take you up.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question.
Sorry, waiting for a microphone.
Yeah, there's one just on its way. There's just.
Right, I just wanted.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Neil Hughes. I'm the chair of Cumbria's Health Scrutiny Committee. First of all, I want to be sure that any bona fide public community representatives in the room who want to have a say have their say first before us formal lumbering
Elected
dogs have their go. So if there's anybody else who wants to come in who wasn't part of a local authority.
Well, that's your only thing. Let's take your question, and then I promise I'll come to you next.
Right, okay. Well, first of all, I agree that whole systems approach is necessary. I very much hope that the district councils as well in Cumbria will be well apprised, because they deliver on, for example, the vital topic of affordable warmth. They coordinate leisure and housing services, and they also give general assistance to the community. And the question I really wanted to ask is how exactly is the County Council expected to be involved in the success regime? But we have our County Council leader, Stuart Young, here, and I'm sure it befits him better to ask that question. So can I touch particularly on the question of transport? And it was well made clear by Sally Burton when she spoke, the extent of difficulty that the County Council, along with local authorities around the country, has faced in taking its budget decisions recently. And in a nutshell, in order to preserve essential social care and children's services, remember our children's services under some pressure, considerable pressure at the moment, we actually had to, for example, remove bus subsidies, not a decision the County Council wanted to take in a situation where public transport was already not good. Now, if the success regime is going to make a difference to Cumbria, it absolutely has to address the issue of transport, or at least, as has been said, assist others who can be better hands-on to do that. So rather than ramble on myself, I'd really be glad for a response from yourself, Sunil, or anybody who's spoken so far, on what practical assistance can be given to all partners in making the transport that people need to get to their health and care appointments better available within the county.
We have established a programme structure. which we are working on and which some of us are meeting this afternoon to discuss further in terms of how we organise. And there is a transport work stream. We absolutely recognise the pivotal importance of a transport plan. And that goes beyond ambulance transport, it's transport services in the wider sense. I don't know what the solution is, but I promise you it's one of our priorities and we will be looking at carefully. Stuart, you and I were able to say hello to one another earlier. Is there anything you'd like to say? I'm intrigued in this challenge really between, if you like, the county council and the district councils. What are your thoughts about that? And I promise I'll come to other people who want to come in a moment.
Yeah, well, I'm Stuart Young, the leader of the county council. And as it happens, Neil, I'm meeting this afternoon with the leaders of the 6 district councils, and I'll be relaying back to them, what has been discussed today. I just wanted to give you an assurance that the County Council is fully committed to supporting this process. I mean, I've got a number of questions I'd like to ask, but I'm conscious of the fact that I get other opportunities to ask those questions. But I can't resist asking one to the regulators, because from both the TDA and Monitor, because I note that you said you would be speaking with one voice. And I'll just raise the issue that in the south of the county, for the Morecambe Bay Trust, they have successfully negotiated an increase in their tariff, which was approved by Monitor, because they're regulated by Monitor. Whereas in the north of the county, and for the Partnership Trust, we haven't had a similar increase in the tariff. And the problem is that the CCG hasn't been given any additional funding. So as things stand, if the Morecambe Bay Trust are allowed to charge their increased tariff, the only place that funding is going to come from is the money that's currently paid to North Cumbria and to the Partnership Trust. So we have really an unacceptable situation which has to be resolved, and that will require additional funds to be put into the system, Neil. And the final point I would make is, I know people don't like to talk about money, and whenever I raise it, people say, well, money isn't, that's not the main issue. And I accept that, but I do believe that if we're able to achieve everything that's been talked about today, and I hope that we can, and we can see differences and changes to the systems in the way that have been talked about, I do believe that in an area like North Cumbria, and the same applies actually in the south of the county, that the resources that we receive are inadequate to deliver the type of health service that people want to see. I mean, in an area where we have 2 district general hospitals, and we have to have 2 district general hospitals, but we have a population of 300,000 people, and we receive funding which really is appropriate to run 1 district general hospital, then somehow that has to be addressed. And I'm with, I'll just finish on this, I'm with Simon Stevens on this. The NHS and partners, we have to do our bit to contribute to savings, and 22 billion will be the figure nationally. But government has indicated that they'll put 8 billion into the system, and I think it's only right that North Cumbria gets its share of that funding.
Thank you very much indeed. That was originally directed towards the regulator, so I've got some views. I might respond, but to
respond.
and you're from NHS England as opposed to Monitor.
My responsibility is with Morecambe Bay elements, which Lynn's partly done in terms of the way the different regulators work. I mean, two or 3 points, and this is only the start of a journey for a lot of people. So a long way to go in the south part of the county yet. And the tariff increase has been agreed. It's not a permanent and absolute and forever tariff increase, and we do have to deal with what are the consequences for the CCG in that decision having been made. What I would say and I partly want to say my answer to you is, let's talk about North Cumbria, and that's another place, but I know for you cover the whole. But what is worth saying is, in the south of the county, including North Lancs, they actually have come up with a plan. And I sat in December in Kendal with all of the key NHS leaders and the county council of both sides, Lancashire and Cumbria, were there, and you couldn't put anything between them on the plan they'd agreed. It was really ambitious and it was really challenging, and they have had a number of problems and still have, as you're aware. The plan got them almost to the level of finances that would need to break even, and a gap remained. And in that context, the tariff modification has been agreed to fill a gap. As I said, the story hasn't finished yet. It doesn't solve all the problems. It in some ways just passes another burden, another part of the system. I think the challenge here is to get a plan that, again, everybody agrees to. And if the last bit of the jigsaw is something to do with the way the funding allocations work, well, Lynn and I, Simon Stevens, our bosses are all up for that discussion. What we have been doing, if we're honest, for the last 5 or 6 years, is spending far more than a tariff modification that South Cumbria is getting on propping up deficits and overspends. So we've actually been getting it anyway, but in a really negative way. It's been a sort of, rather than a sustainable solution, it's always been a bailout, if you want to use that word, and that's not satisfactory. So I think it's a really good point. I think it definitely comes into consideration. My plea to everybody is, don't think that the answer to the problems is a bailout. We've had that before. It doesn't deal sustainably with all the issues. Money is part of the solution, but as you rightly say, the NHS has got to deliver 22 billion worth of improvements. We've heard that there's a 90 million problem in health and a 33 million problem in social care from these speeches. My view is that's typical of the rest of the NHS too. Cumbria isn't unique in that. The only problem is Cumbria is starting about 25, 30 million behind everybody else. So we've got to get to go and then do what the rest of the NHS and social care system has got to do in terms of addressing that gap. So points are really well made and completely understood. Our job is to work with you to try and get the solutions and then look at what are the financial underpinnings that are going to make that work.
I think a commitment to listen carefully at our arguments in terms of the resource position without any guarantee that we will get that which we think we deserve. There's a question at the far back, and then I think you were next, and then the lady here.
Thank you. Sandra Guide, I'm Maternity Services Liaison Committee User Representative. I just wanted to pick up on the point about communication and engagement, because it is a very important thing, and I don't think it's something in terms of engagement that we've really seen a lot of good examples of here in North Cumbria, in my personal view. I have attended 2 MSLC meetings this week, one in West Cumbria and one in East Cumbria that covers Eden and Carlisle, and there the users of the services are saying that it's been a long time since we had the RCOG option appraisal report published, yet still we're not out there talking to women. And what I'd like to say is that's where we should start. If you want patients to have a good experience of services, you need to find out what they think are good services and how we can meet those needs. So thank you for emphasising that it's one of your priorities, and we look forward to hearing how that's going to actually work in practice to meet users' expectations.
It's an entirely reasonable point, and as I was thinking about the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists report and the response, it seems to me that the timeline, which takes us well into next year, is probably more leisurely than we would like in terms of trying to get to some view about a way forward. So we're thinking about how we can bring that forward. And I couldn't agree with you more. It needs consummate involvement with maternity liaison committees and a whole host of other people as well. So thank you for your comment. There's a question here, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, Eric Marshall. I'm a shadow Northumbrian governor for Carlisle. And to be honest, I've been the shadow governor for about 3 years. And I think we're getting fed up of being shadows. But I've listened very carefully, but what hasn't been said is the decision-making process. So Neil, you said hard decisions are going to have to be taken. Have you got the authority to take those decisions? Or are we going to get a fudge at the end of this?
Do you mean across the board?
We're going to come up with a plan and say that's what should happen.
Okay.
Have you got the decision, or your board got the power to take that decision, or are you going to pass it on?
I'm not renowned for passing things on, actually, but I have to be aware of my scope of authority because I'm not a statutory body. So supposing we come up with a plan for the future that has significant changes, then there are scrutiny committees who need to be involved, for example. I have to be acutely conscious of the boards of the commissioners, of the 2 NHS providers as well. So I have an interesting tightrope to walk, but I've had discussions with the regulators about my authority, and I'm pretty clear that the regulators want me to have vested in me as much authority on their behalf as it's humanly possible. But I can't transgress the law. I can't, for example, say to the Care Quality Commission, thank you very much for your interest in this or that issue, but please go away, for example. but I can assert a lot of influence, I can assert a lot of authority vested in me by these guys. And there'll be times when you will think I'm dancing around things, and I've no doubt, judging by the tenor of your question, you'll tell me, and I'd appreciate that, because that'd be very helpful in terms of me thinking about how we can make even better progress. There's a question here.
Hello, I'm Mary Bradley. I'm Chief Exec at Age UK locally, and also Chair of the Care Sector Alliance of Cumbria. You can't have every partner demonstrated this morning, but I do think that in the negotiations, the third sector, and particularly the larger organisations in the third sector, have a very key role to do in turning this. We are not amateurish, we are professional, and we also have access to significant money. For instance, at the moment we're sitting on potentially £5 million of SIB investment. Having a dialogue and progressing that forward into Cumbria is challenging. And we need to be able to get over things like that and be able to do that. And we're not alone as Age UK in that. There are other significant voluntary organisations here who can make a significant difference and really help you. And at the lower area of everything we do engage, and we do have a lot of contact with people, and we can help change the culture as well as help deliver services. As Chair of the Care Sector Alliance, I would like to say that the independent care sector here is very important. It's struggling, it has problems with recruitment, and it would be very helpful if, when you're thinking of recruitment fairs and everything else you're doing, if you just remember that it's a very, very important sector to you. And we have to get to the way, and I know Sally has done a lot of work from this, from it being confrontation over tendering to being actually what we can do as a care sector to support you. And as the care sector in this area is made up of a lot of third sector organisations, there is a synergy there, and a synergy which will help you and support you if only you'll engage.
Thank you. I promise you we will engage. You remind me that I hardly gave any emphasis whatsoever to the third sector, and I should have done. That's an omission on my part. In my defence, my track record in other parts of the country where I'm working, my involvement with the third sector is very intense, and I intend to carry that forward. So thank you for putting that on the table. There's a question over here.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Jamie Reid, MP for Copeland, until recently Shadow Health Minister. I just wanted to raise a few points. You mentioned the acquisition. I think there was a presumption beneath the point that this is universally welcomed in the west of the county, and it isn't. So I think if we are going to have the kind of wide-ranging negotiation with the public that you rightly outlined as being necessary, I think we need to guard against that presumption. I think secondly, how great are the flexibilities that we're talking about in the process here? So for instance, public health spending in Kensington, the richest borough in the county, in the country, I beg your pardon, £165 per head. In Cumbria, £33 per head. Guess who gets the best health outcomes? And then on the flexibility too, with the Royal Colleges, we know that the Royal Colleges, in particular with regard to maternity services, would not like to see consultant maternity services in units producing less than 3,000 births a year. In Holland, Germany, France, it's routinely 1,000. And then the most important point, I think, is the point that Eric made with regard to who holds the ring on making these decisions. If we look at the comparison between the success regime and what is essentially administration, in administration there's a very clear process for community groups, for patient groups, for local authorities to pursue a legal route if they don't like what is essentially a health service reconfiguration. The success regime is a health service reconfiguration right across the board. We know that, there's no two ways about that, that's not hidden. But in a properly structured administration regime, we know what our legal rights, responsibilities and routes are. I'm not clear what they are with the success regime. Could you point that out, please?
On that last point, I expect the existing statutory structures to be the process through which these kind of changes would have to be taken. So in terms of consultation about a series of changes, I would imagine, unless the regulators tell me differently, that the CCG, who would therefore have to believe in that which is being proposed, would organise and undertake with us, our involvement, the formal consultation. If the consultation is contested, then it would be referred to the scrutiny committee, as it would be under the present arrangements. The success regime would have a part to play in that and try and influence satisfactory outcomes. and so on and so forth. So I suppose, Jimmy, this is the point I'm trying to make. There is I suppose, an informal power base, authority vested in me through the success regime, and I won't hesitate to use my influence to try and exercise that. But we can't ignore the statutory arrangements. Now, whether we can come up with some freedoms that can quickly be adopted to enable us to have more real authority, if you like, I'm not entirely sure. But it's a discussion I'm gearing up to have in the roundabout freedoms and flexibilities with the regulators in the near future. All I can say is I hope it takes it forward. I'd like us to have as much real authority as we possibly can. I take your point about the acquisition. I know it's not universally welcomed. I was offering you a view that, in my opinion, knowing the Northumbria organisation as I do and the excellence that it exudes, it will bring lots of benefits across the whole of the system. And I also offered the view, which I haven't really heard at all actually, that you guys should not imagine that the benefits would only be one way, because you have an awful lot to offer across the county border, if you like, towards Northumbria. Your funding comment is reasonable. There's not much more I can add to that other than the point that Richard Barker made. I want us to be in a position, if necessary, to make a cogent argument about the Cumbria funding position, but that will not be easy. Don't forget, on the NHS side, Cumbria NHS receives 5% more, I think is the figure, than it ought to in terms of fair shares, in terms of its allocation. I'm looking for colleagues who know more about this than I do. So we're starting from a difficult position. And yet we've got these structural issues that Stuart alluded to, about the distance between the two acute hospitals and the extra costs that that creates. And we've got this tariff issue as well that we have to manage. So it's a complex issue. I'm not afraid of the challenge, and I'm not afraid to take it on, but I'll only take it on if I'm confident that we've got a case. And I think that was Stuart's point as well, and we'll certainly keep that under careful review. Now, we're over time, but I think we're having... Is the lunch being provided?
It is when we finish this bit.
Right, let's take, well, for as long as you want to ask questions, apparently lunch can't be laid out, so it's up to you. Let's take another further couple of questions. There's one here, there's one there, one there. 3 more questions and then we'll break.
Hello, my name is Carol Davis and I work for the North West Ambulance Service. We've got colleagues here today and there hasn't been one mention of ambulance services yet.
Here's your moment.
And
I mentioned them earlier.
In passing.
That's what happens with ambulances. Sorry.
And I think my observation would be that as a health partner, it's just really important that we would be part of this ongoing conversation from here on in.
Yeah, well, I had a very interesting discussion with your Chief Executive a couple of weeks ago, who told me that of the 22 ambulances that are allocated to this part of Cumbria at any given time, 6 of them are in the northeast, and that's a very difficult balancing act for him to manage, and they need to be in the northeast because of the very specialist care and the transportation of patients to there. I understand that entirely. I know that this is an issue that the transport group that has been established will be starting to think about. But we need to find different, more imaginative ways of providing our ambulance services, in my view.
I agree, and I think that we are much more than just transport.
I agree.
And I think that sometimes we feel a bit insulted when we're just called transport.
Well, now here's a thing for you. Why do you think that is? Perhaps the ambulance service doesn't assert itself and promote what else it does, as perhaps it might do. And maybe if we could find a way of that happening, then people would have a broader appreciation of the excellence you do beyond just ferrying people backwards and forwards. And I understand entirely the point you make.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's a question there. And I said 3, but there's a 4th. There's a gentleman here next and then a gentleman here.
Hello, John Rush. I'm a lay member with the Cumbria Clinical Commissioning Group with responsibility for public engagement. And the one thing that I just want to emphasise is, and David did touch on it, it's about the confidence of our public and our community in the health service here, which is particularly low. And in order to try and develop that, one of the things that I think you should include within your engagement strategy is around developing of confidence. Not just about the engagement, but development of confidence. And it's actually subtly different, but you still need to do it. And part of that does involve leadership. And I know that Sue touched on those events before. One of the things I would urge is that as many key leaders of the different partnerships go to as many of those events as they possibly can, because don't see them as an engagement event where information gets collected and then you go and present it. See it as an opportunity to build trust and confidence. And as difficult as that is, as challenging as that is over time, that will enable part of that trust to be developed and worked on. So I just urge that.
That's a good one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentleman here, and then the last question in the front here.
Hi, I'm Neil Robson. I'm a public governor of the Partnership Foundation Trust. Can I ask how many, apart from the CCG representatives, how many GPs do we have here today? Working as a normal everyday GP. Yeah.
So I didn't think we'd get into trying to define what is a GP.
Okay, my point is, in 5 years as a governor of the trust, I've been to lots and lots of meetings, and I have never seen a GP attend any of those meetings.
Well, we've got
Great.
So how many psychiatrists are here?
But GPs are the key. Everything goes through the GP.
But, I mean, I think you make a fair point, and I made the point, I think, in terms of engagement. It's not just public engagement. We have to step up the clinical engagement and have a much richer involvement of clinicians across the board. If we can achieve that, then I think we'll make even better progress. It's a fair point. I think you're next. Oh, all right, then, and one after that. You are the very last question.
Hi, I'm Les Hanley. I'm a lay member of Cumbria CCG. Recruitment is a major issue, but I think we need to recognise that recruitment is not just an issue for the NHS, it's an issue for Cumbria as a whole. And all the major industries in Cumbria are experiencing problems. Cumbria is going to see one of the largest capital investments anywhere in the country over the next decade, which is going to lead to an increase in the population, which needs to be recognised in looking at all the future health requirements, particularly in West Cumbria. Potentially up to 40,000 people are going to come into West Cumbria over the next 10 years. Not to stay, but be passing through. This is recognised, and there is a fledgling working group being put together to bring together health, industry, local authorities and universities, so that everyone can work together to address the issue of recruitment. One of the areas identified is the image of Cumbria. Cumbria is known as the Lake District. Cumbria, of course, is much more than the Lake District, and the West Coast tends to be not recognised. Discussions are in place with the LEP and the Cumbria Tourism Board to see if we can actually look to rebrand Cumbria, to actually make the knowledge of the area wider, to raise the profile of West Cumbria. And I think that the success regime needs to recognise the issues, the wider issues, and work with all the other partners in the group.
Thank you.
You don't want to change the name as well. We don't, no.
Your comments confirm my understanding from the Cumbria Deals document that this is an endemic problem. It's a multi-sector problem and something which Cumbria as a whole needs to deal with. You'll forgive me if I'm very selfishly focused on the NHS and to the extent that the interface care as well. But I do take your point, and I think it would be impertinent as obviously we organised a summit and didn't have the opportunity for the wider discussion to take place as well, so thank you for that. The very last question, or comment, or whatever it is you want to say.
It's both actually. I'm Ruth Gildert, I'm the nurse on the governing body of the CCG. I'm sorry to my back to everybody. One point, first of all, or one plea, I suppose, is that you talk quite a lot about involving clinicians, and I would just like to make the point that clinicians are far more than doctors. Because sometimes we forget that, I think. And the other part of my question really is, we talked about unpalatable decisions, we talked about coming up with new ways of working and new ideas. What parameters are there to the plan? Because what happens if it becomes, the plan is unpalatable to the powers that be, as it were? There must be some parameters that we're working within, and I haven't heard any.
Well, with this kind of exercise, through a process of analysis, through a process of local and external expertise, and through a process of consummately good engagement, you come up with a view about a reasonable way forward. And a reasonable way forward needs to demonstrate service sustainability, both in terms of safety and quality, but it also needs to be affordable. Now, we've touched on the affordability issue, and we won't go into that any further. And there's a plethora of advice and policy guidance from NHS England and their national directors in this or that, from esteemed organisations such as the King's Fund. So, for example, I mean, one of the cornerstones of a new service strategy needs to address the issue of integrated out-of-hospital care. Some papers I read suggested that the North Cumbria Acute Hospital Trust at any given time had a very high percentage of people who need not be in hospital at that time, for a variety of reasons. So how do we address that? Well, there are all sorts of people available to help address that kind of thing. So there isn't an easy answer. There's not a framework that we can pick from the Department of Health which says, if you address all of these questions and tick all of these boxes, you'll have a damn good plan. Because it doesn't work like that. You have to tailor it for local needs and take account of local opinions, local involvement and expertise as well.
So, if for argument's sake it was a really good plan with all the international and national experts and everybody else, we could say actually the only way it would work that is if you put a motorway in. Is that a parameter that would immediately rule it out?
Probably, because, well, I mean, I know of one or two places where transport decisions of that nature have been part of a discussion. The Watford Health Campus, if I remember correctly, resulted in the decision that a new underground station should be built to support health in that area. So I think through the Cumbria deal, that might be something that we might debate. But of course, that wouldn't be within the gift of the NHS or the local authority. That would have to be subject to national deliberation and so forth. But let's not rule anything out. I mean, honestly, I don't want to constrain people. I really would like a free-thinking debate about that which is possible and see what we can come up with.
I think that's the answer.
Okay, we'll settle for a dual carriageway. On that note, can I just thank you for the richness of feedback and challenge. We really look forward to working with you. I think we might have another event of this nature towards the turn of the year, so you can hold us to account and tell us what you think we've been able to do and how we might do it better, and we can report directly to you about the progress as we see it. That might appeal to you, it might not, but that's a suggestion. But meanwhile, thank you again, have a good afternoon, and lunch is served. Thank you.